question I want to start off with today is a pretty simple one. Last week we used the idea of, your grade on a homework assignment or a test as a way of thinking about percentages. And so for this one I have a student received an 80% on their most recent math test. The test had 40 problems. How many problems did the student get correct? Last week when we looked at the homework assignment, I think we said 8 out of 10 was the homework assignment. What does that mean? Well, we knew that that meant 80% because we were able to convert 8/10 to 80 over 100, and 80 out of 100 means you got an 80%. The problem with this one is that the test has 40 problems, and that's not something that can easily be converted to a 100. I can't just multiply the top and bottom by 10 or multiply the top and bottom of my fraction 8/10 or in this case something out of 40 and get it to be a nice number over 100. It's not quite as easy as what we were doing last week. So how are we going to go about solving this problem? By the end of class today, we should be able to solve this problem, and we'll come back to it here shortly. When it comes to finding the percent of a number, there's really essentially two ways that we can solve a problem like the one we just saw about the 80% on the math test. One way we can do it is we can do it by changing the percent to a fraction. Now, there's two different ways, and I want you guys to use whichever way works best for you. I'm going to show you how to do both ways the first couple times. After a while, I'm going to switch over to the method that is the quickest and the easiest for me. You guys can continue to use whichever one works for you. So if you remember back when we looked at percentages last week, if we had something like that 80%, to change that to a fraction, we just took and wrote our percentage over 100, because remember, percents are always out of 100, and if you actually break it down, percent, per meaning out of, and cent, if you think about a century, century's 100 years, it's just a way of saying 100. So we've got 80 out of 100, and we can simplify this down. If we divide by 10, it gives us something like 8/10, which is a much easier fraction to work with. Or if we go all the way down to simplest form, we would have 4/5. So we could use 4/5 to represent the fraction 80%. That's one of the ways that we can go about attacking this problem. The other way would be changing the percent to a decimal. Okay, again, last week we looked at 80%. And we had this sort of little trick or shortcut. And we know that anytime we have 80%, if the decimal's here in a percentage, we just move the decimal 2 spots to the left. And then our new decimal would be 80/100ths or 0.8 or even 8/10. You didn't have to put that 0 if you didn't want to. Remember, why does that work? That's because we're taking this original fraction from up above, and essentially we're doing the math to it. We're taking 80, dividing it by 100. In order to make that work, we have to add a decimal and a 0. Decimal's not very good. There we go. 100 goes into 800 8 times. We do our subtraction, pop our decimal up, and there you go. So we can look at it two different ways, as converting the decimal or the percent to a fraction, or converting the percent to a decimal. Either way is going to get us the same answer. It's really just a preference for what's easier for you. So for example 1, it wants us to find 20% of 50. Okay, so I'm going to show you the first method is going to be using a fraction. The second one I'll do with using a decimal. We'll try a couple that way, and as I said before, I'm going to move on and use the method that I feel more comfortable with and the one that I think is quickest and easiest. So here we go. 20%. We know if 20% was going to be written as a fraction, it would look like 20 over 100. Okay. Now, again, back like on the last slide when I was looking at 80% and I wrote it as 80 over 100, I really want to get this fraction down into the simplest form as I can. One of the things I hope you always pick out on these is if you ever see the zeros at the end, you know that you just can divide by 10 very, very quickly, and 20 divided by 10 is 2, 100 divided by 10 is 10. This is still not in simplest form. We can divide by 2, which would be 1/5. Okay. So we've got 20%, which is equal to 1/5. So what I would do now is I would actually take and multiply 1/5 times 50. Now, the reason I'm multiplying is because of this word of. Anytime we see the word of in a math problem, it usually 99% of the time means that you're going to be multiplying. And in this case, it's definitely true. If I'm going to multiply by the whole number 50, what does the whole number 50 look like as a fraction? If you remember back from our fraction unit a few weeks ago, in order to write the whole number 50 as a fraction, you'd have to write 50 over 1. Okay? So let's work this out then. And if I do this, 1 times 50 is 50, and 5 times 1 is 5. So I have 50 over 5. Well, that doesn't help me because I want a number. I don't want a fraction. I want an actual number. So I'm going to go ahead and what I mean is I want not just a fraction, but I want a whole number and either a decimal or something along those lines. I don't want just a fraction. So if I take 50 and divide it by 5, I know that 5 goes into 5 one time. Bring my 0 down. 5 goes into 0 times. So my answer then is 10. Some of you might have also noticed that I could have, before I started my problem, simplified my fraction. If I divided these both by 5, this becomes 1, this becomes 10, and I have 1 times 10 is 10, 1 times 1 is 1, 10 over 1 is 10. But I figured out now that 20% of 50 is 10. Let's try it using the decimal format. If I have 20% and I convert it to a decimal, remember we move the decimal 2 spaces to the left because we divide by 100. So I've got 0.20, and again, same idea, times 50. You can do it either way. I'll go ahead and put the whole number 50 on top and multiply times 0.20 or 20 hundredths. And if I do my math here, 0 times 0, 0 times 5, 0 for my placeholder, move over to the 2. 2 times 0 is 0, 2 times 5 is 10. If I look up at my problem, I have 1, 2 decimal places or spaces behind a decimal in my problem, so I have to have 1, 2 down here, giving me 10.00 or just the whole number 10. If you can look at this, you might figure out already what's my preferred method, what I feel is the quickest and easiest way to do this problem. I prefer using a decimal just because you move the decimal 2 spots to the left, multiply, throw your decimal in, and there's your answer. Whereas up above, you have to write a fraction, simplify the fraction, and put yourself into a situation where you have to divide. It seems like a few more steps for me. I prefer the decimal. The next example, I'll do the same way as this one. You decide which one works best for you. But 20% of 50 in both cases here, we've proven to be 10. The next fraction I have, or the next problem I have for you, is find 6% of 100. So we're going to essentially do the same concept as we just did in the last one. 6% written as a fraction would be 6 out of 100. And 6 out of 100 we can simplify. It's not quite as easy as the last one in terms of being able to use a bigger number. I'm going to start off with 2 because 6 divided by 2 is 3, 100 divided by 2 is 50, and unfortunately I'm at simplest form there. So if I'm going to do this, I would have to then say, okay, 3/50 times 100 over 1. Because to make my 100 a whole number, it has to be over 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and simplify this before I start because I see something very, 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 very easy to do here. I know that I can divide 150 by 50. 50 divided by 50 is 1. 100 divided by 50 is 2. And so I end up with 3 times 2 is 6, and 1 times 1 is 1. Meaning that 6% of 100 is 6. Pretty simple. That one was a little bit easier than the last one we did because there's less division at the end, but that's also because I simplified during the problem. Let's look at it using a decimal. 6%. We have to move the decimal 2 spaces to the left and fill in the 0 to hold the place. So it's 0.06. Okay. Now let's do the math. 100 times 0.06. 6 times 0 is 0, 6 times 0 is 0, 6 times 1 is 6. Put a 0 down to move over. 0, 0, 0. Oh, how about that? Not even really necessary to do because all of them end up being 0. So if I do my math here at the bottom, running out of room, I've got essentially 600, but I've got 1, 2 spaces behind a decimal up here, so I need to have 1, 2 down here. Put my decimal there, 6.00, or the whole number 6. Either way works. Again, it's whatever you're most comfortable with. All right, let's try one more. Here's a little bit of a bigger percentage, and let's see what this one looks like. 95% of 50. So 95%, let's make that into a fraction, is 95 over 100. And we've got to definitely make sure we can simplify this down. Now, this is some big numbers here. These are some big numbers. So 90, I've got a 5 and I've got a 100. So I know that I can divide them by 5. So let's start off with 95. Well, 95 divided by 5. 5 goes in one time. And 9 times 5 is 45. So, all right, I know that it would be 19 over, and 100 divided by 5, that's much easier to do. That's just 20. 19 over 20. Still some pretty big numbers, but let's see how this works for us. 19 20ths times 50 over 1. I can simplify within the problem here. 50 and 20 can both be divided by 10, so I have 5 and 2. So 19 times 5. I'm going to come over here and do that off to the side because I don't know my 19 facts very, very well. 9 times 5 is 45. 5 times 1 is 95. How about that? Think about that. We just divided by 5 earlier. 95. 2 times 1 is 2. That leaves us with a little bit of a math problem here to do. 95 divided by 2. 2 goes into 9 4 times for 8. Drop our 5 down. 2 will go into 15 7 times for 14. Let's add a decimal and a 0. Bring our 0 down. 2 goes into 10 5 times. And we have our problem finished. 47 5/10, or 47.5. There were a lot of steps involved in solving that one, and this is a perfect example of why using the decimal form is much easier. Watch how easy it is when I use the decimal form. Remember, 95%, move my decimal 1, 2 spaces to the left, so I have 0.95. Now all I have to do is take 50 times 0.95. My decimal's not showing up very well. There it is. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 5 is 25. 0 to hold my place. 9 times 0 is 0. 9 times 5 is 45. So add up my numbers. 1, 2 places behind the decimal up there. 1, 2 down here. Remember, the 0 at the end does not change the value of the number. I can add zeros as long as I want to, and it still means the same thing. A lot less math steps involved using the decimal. All right, so I want you to try some on your own. Here's the first one. The first one is find 40% of 15. So go ahead, pause the video, work this problem out, and push play when we're ready to see an answer. Okay, so let's see how we did. I'll go ahead and show you both the fraction and the decimal form for this one. The next one I won't. I'm just going to go straight to the decimal form. So find 40% of 15. 40% written as a fraction looks like 40 over 100. And we know we can divide that by 10, which would give me 4 over 10. And we can divide again by 2, which would give me 2 over 5, or 2/5. So if I take my 15 over 1 and multiply that times my 2/5, Ooh, I can actually simplify here. Divide by 5, which gives me 1 and 3. Tells me 2 times 3 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1, so my answer then is 6. So 6 is 40% of 15. Let's try decimal way. 40%. Move my decimal 2 spots to the left, and I get decimal 40. So I'll take my decimal 40, and I'll multiply that times 15. 0 times 5 is 0, 0. Put my 0 to hold my place. 4 times 5 is 20. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6. Add them up. 1, 2 decimal place up here, 1, 2 down here. So I end up with an answer of 6.00, which is the exact same thing as 6. All right, check what you did on your paper and see where your mistakes are if you got this wrong. Okay, hopefully you can see easily where the mistake was, whether it was maybe doing the decimal multiplication or possibly your fraction simplification. But hopefully you can see where the mistake was and we can correct that. We'll try another one here. Your turn. This is 5% of 90. So go ahead and pause the video again. Go ahead and try it out on your own and hit play when you guys are ready to see the answer. Okay, 5% of 90. And like I said, I'm just going to go ahead and do decimal form now. I've got 5%, which is the same as moving my decimal 2 spots to the left, 0.05. So let's take that times 90. 0 times 5 is 0. 0 times 0 is 0. Put my 0 to move over to 9. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 times 0 is 0, plus 4 is 4. Do my addition. 1, 2. Decimal place up here. 1, 2 down here. So my answer should be 4.50. Or if you just came up with 4.5 and let that 0 off, that's just fine. So there's your answer. All right, hopefully you have a pretty good understanding of this, but now I want